Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech video, we're going to be doing something very different. We're going to discuss memories of technology. How did you first get into gaming? How did you first get into computers? How did you get your passion started? This is actually how I got mine started many years ago. That's right, when I was a kid. This was the very first experience I ever had with video games. So we're going to be starting things off with me and how I really got into technology, but I also want to hear from you. So please, in the comments, tell me what ignited your passion. Whether you're more into gaming, whether you're more into hardware, whatever your hobby. Tell me, because I'm curious to know whether you're old, whether you're young. It'll be kind of good to get a nice conversation going, I think, in the comments. So, with that said, let's just start. So, this monstrosity of a console was my very first experience in video games, and as you can see, it's pretty darn old. Yeah. And this console, it's an all-in-one device. It is called the Prinztronic Tournament TV. That's right. And it has several games which you can select, and it has these wonderful paddles. And that's about the extent of the technology. I'm just going to plop this down very gingerly. There we go. And I originally got that when I was really young. I don't remember the exact age, but I perhaps was, I don't know, 4 or 5. And a friend of the family happened to bring it over one day. And from what I remember, as I said, I was really young, he was going to get rid of it. And he said, hey, does Paul want this? Do you want this for Paul? And, you know, my parents said, sure. Just kind of gauging whether I'd be interested in it. And, of course, they hooked it up to the television and I started to mess around and, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. But it wasn't something I necessarily was, like, super hooked on. It was very basic. It was like, just for example, Pong, pretty much, with Tetris, where you had donk, 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 donk. Very simple. But still, I got the basic principle. But I remember one of the things that really got me, remember, once again, I was extremely young, and this is the first time I'd ever seen anything remotely like this, was that this device, the television, that normally you're just not interacting with, you're just watching, right? I'm able to control something on the screen. I'm able to actually make something move according to how I want. And it was very rudimentary, it was very simple. But I remember I was really excited about it. And I recall that my parents remembered my interest when it came to around the Christmas period. And at the time, I was still really young, as I've mentioned, just 5 or 6, and there was the Atari 2600 Junior, and I recall that they bought that for me, which of course had the single joystick and the one button, and they bought that with a couple of games, and I was still really hooked on it. And I remember that the joystick felt really stiff for my hand, and I was like, wow, this thing does not feel very comfortable at all. But I really got into it, and that was really, for me, how gaming kind of started. I was really hooked on the idea of being able to control something and then seeing that immediate feedback on the screen. That really got to me. At that time as well, I was getting very into electronics. So what did that mean? What did getting into electronics mean? Well, essentially, I was pretty much a danger to myself and everyone around me when it came to being left alone in a room with any electronics that were vulnerable to my prying hands. So what does that mean? Well, if there was a screwdriver around or any means to pry open an electronic device, you can pretty much bet that I would be trying to do very similar. That would mean that I would be opening up plug sockets. That would mean that I would try to open up the VCR. And I remember that my dad, in sheer desperation after I got electrocuted a couple of times, and by the way, the UK uses 240 volts, not the most fun experience, he just, out of pure desperation, talked with his acquaintance / friend at a electronics shop that was, I don't know, 5-ish minutes walk from my place, and he would come back with old VCRs and other bits and pieces for me to take apart, usually with supervision at the start, so I didn't start running my fingers into, you know, things that would have lots of electrical voltage still remaining in them. And that would be kind of how I started to learn, okay, well, this is what a motor does, and this is what this does, and this is how a VCR functions, at least in a simple sense. And yeah, after that I started to graduate more to other things, like I started to really want a Sega Master System, which I suppose was the first real console that I really wanted. But I recall at the time that I didn't get the Master System originally. Instead, and it'd been out for a while, I actually got an old Sinclair Spectrum. And once again, it had been out for a little bit, but I think my parents disliked the idea of me being able to do other things rather than just playing video games. And the Master System, which I believe was Mark I at the time when I was really looking at it, although it might have been Mark II, I don't remember. And I just remember looking at the graphics of this thing and really wanting one, but my parents, I guess because A, it was cheaper, and B, because I think actually the primary reason was just that they wanted me to kind of learn how a computer works. So they got me this 8-bit microcomputer, and I think I got the James Bond pack, which I think they got on a discount, and I had like the light gun and other bits and pieces with it, and I remember I was quite addicted to it. And for about a year I was using this thing almost exclusively, and rather good timing, but the movie War Games actually appeared on television, and I remember being hopelessly addicted to this movie War Games and really addicted to the Spectrum. And I was not exactly learning how to program precisely because I didn't have enough information. I had a couple of the basic manuals which kind of gave me the basic gist of, okay, well, this is how this happens and this is how this happens. And I remember kind of like, oh, so this is how the Spectrum draws this, and a few other bits and pieces. But I was really into the games at the time, and I was really into, like, just once again the idea of the control factor, and it was just this passion. The problem was, and probably a lot of parents can vouch for this, that the Spectrum, along with the Atari, used a connection which of course hooked up to the television, which was not great for my parents. So one of the things they did was buy me another microcomputer, which was the CPC 464. And it was not necessarily supposed to be an upgrade. It was more just so that it had its own monitor, and I could still learn to do the basics with computers, but it had its own screen, and it had a colour monitor, and I think it came with a printer and a few other bits and pieces. If memory serves, my parents got it for free or quite cheap, I don't remember. Once again, I was still pretty darn young. And this was about the time that I think they realised that, yeah, he's really hooked on video games and really hooked on technology, and I was still opening up TVs and VCRs, and at that time, now the good news is I was no longer electrocuting myself. I kind of realised that you might want to turn the power off first, which is always a bonus. And I then started to help my dad out a lot, or just kind of mess around with like wiring and like installing phone sockets in the house if that was necessary, and do basic electrical wiring and, you know, that type of thing, like putting plug sockets together and doing whatever. So I kind of had like a good understanding of the basics. I certainly wasn't advanced, but I kind of understood the basics at this point. And this love affair continued for quite a while, and eventually I remember just bugging my parents for like a year or so, until finally they relented. Finally they relented, and they bought me a Sega Master System. And I remember it had gone down in price quite a bit at this point, and it was the Master System 2, which looked a bit like a shoebox, to be honest. I still think the original Master System 1 design looked cooler. That's just my personal opinion. And the Master System 2 that I got had a built-in game, which was Alex the Kid, and I do remember being really dumbfounded before I got the system. I wonder how that works. Like, what happens to play Alex Kidd, you just not put in a game? Does it just boot automatically? I wonder how the system actually figures that out. There must be, and I remember this was going through my brain, and I was asking my parents, and of course they didn't know. But I was really curious on how the system would be able to detect the game and what mechanism it was using to identify whether there was a game in there. And I realised, of course, it must be reading the cartridge, and then something in the cartridge, something in there must be telling the system, okay, well, if it detects this cartridge, instead of executing the code or the game which is built into the system, instead run this. And I remember that was something that I was really excited to try out, just to see whether that was indeed the case. And of course it was. And I remember loading up Alex Kidd, and I remember the graphics and the animation and the music. And this was, yeah, it was such a big jump over the Ataris and the Spectrums. Not that they were bad. There were a couple of really cool Spectrum games, and certainly there were some awesome CPC games as well, and I absolutely loved them. But they certainly could not compete with what I was seeing on screen here. I remember the first time I loaded up Alex Kidd, and the music and just the opening level, and being able to punch the blocks and be able to like move down, and how the screen was smoothly scrolling with you, which was leaps and bounds of what most games were capable of on the 8-bit computers, just because obviously of the dedicated hardware. And about this point, a lot of the retro stuff, I say that in loose terms because it was old when I was getting it, but a lot of that stuff my parents started to pack away, and I was no longer that interested in the Spectrum and the you know, the Atari 2600. I barely played them anymore because obviously the Master System was the way to go. And I actually remember that the Master System wasn't new when I got it by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the Mega Drive had already been out. And I just remember that I really wanted the Mega Drive, but there was no way I was going to convince my parents to jump straight onto that. It was way too expensive at the time. And I was just happy to have this darn Master System. And it's actually kind of funny, he says, reaching over. I actually found the console down there a while ago. It was actually in a section of my mom's house. As people who have been around on the channel know, last year I actually lost my mum to cancer. So I obviously was kind of clearing out some stuff and figuring out what I wanted to keep, like keepsakes and all that. And that was one of the things I took with me. Unfortunately, I remember when I was younger, I did sell my Master System and some other consoles as well, which I really regret. The reason I did it was because I was looking for funds for the, what was it? Maybe in the Saturn? I think for Saturn games, I can't remember, but I got rid of a lot of my old like consoles, and yeah, I do regret that a lot. So just, if you're younger and you're watching this, don't sell your consoles now. Trust me, in later life, you're going to regret it. That's all I'm going to say to you. You're going to regret it. And there's a crap ton of games I've sold on my Saturn, which is a different story, and perhaps I'll tell it in a different video if you guys are interested. But I actually bought a Sega Saturn, and I've actually got a copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga. I bought that when it was released in the UK. It's very limited quantities, and it's a very expensive game. But I also had a lot of other rare Saturn games, and of course back then they were not rare, but I got rid of them. And the same for PlayStation as well. I had a crap ton of games, and I just sold them. So unfortunately, those games, along with a lot of the 8-bit stuff, I got rid of, including my Spectrum. I have no idea what I did with it. I think it may have gone in the car boot sale, which kind of ticks me off. But anyway, I digress. That was found in a bag with some other stuff, including, and this probably gives you an idea of how old this was at my kind of age. You see some Power Ranger stickers there. I have no idea if these are in, you know, in focus, but yeah, a couple of Power Ranger stickers. In fact, I've got an entire set of them right here. And yeah, so that plus some other memorabilia, Jesus, I can't speak, I found in this bag. And I actually still got the CPC 464. That's actually one of the 8-bit, that's one of the only 8-bit things and older kind of hardware I still have. I've got the CPC 464 still, complete with monitor, a printer for it, which I don't think I'm going to be able to get ink that works for that, maybe I'm wrong. And I think somewhere I still have the disk drive for it, not 100% on that. I don't think I've got any games for it though. I might have the odd one, which of course they came on tape. Maybe if I get some, I don't know, requests, I'll take a look at it. Of course, it could blow me up and kill me, because I haven't actually turned the darn thing on in like, I don't know, like a long time, maybe 20 years. So that could be risky, but I'm willing to take that risk for you guys. So that could be kind of fun. So let me know if you want me to do that. And eventually, this is kind of closing out the video now, eventually my love affair for technology continued. And I remember at this point, I was very aware of graphics, I was very aware of animation, and I was very aware of what was actually the driving force behind them. And that was really what was getting in my head. I wanted to know, why was the graphics on this Spectrum inferior to the graphics that were on the Master System? Why were the graphics on the Master System inferior to the graphics on the Mega Drive? And I didn't come at this as like, oh, I'm an ex-owner, I need to know why this is better, or I need to defend this system. Instead I was like, why is this better? Okay. And I was looking at it, and the problem was, of course, it was very difficult for me to know. But I could start to get some ideas. Like, one of the reasons, of course, is that, oh, okay, well, the Mega Drive is 16-bit, and the Master System is 8-bit. Okay, what does that actually mean? And I started to read and try and figure out, okay, so this is what 8-bit means, this is what 16-bit means, okay. Okay, so one of the other reasons the Mega Drive looks better is because it's got this many more colours. That makes sense because I can definitely see a wider array of shades and colours on screen. That definitely makes sense to me. And that's kind of how my brain was working back then, because I didn't have the internet. I just didn't have it. No one did, really. I couldn't just Google, you know, Mega Drive versus Master System, or I guess you guys would have called it Genesis. If you're in the States, I couldn't just Google that. So the best thing I could do was to buy like hardcore gaming magazines, or rather my dad was buying hardcore gaming magazines for me, and for me to read them, read the manuals of whatever I could get my hands on that was computer orientated, and try and figure out things the best I could. And of course later on in life I got the internet as quickly as I could, which is a different story. I got 56k. I got to enjoy the screams and the torment, also known as the sounds of dial-up, which were just like pure evil. So yeah, that's just some of the stories. There is a lot more that I'm kind of glazing over because I don't want this video to be like really boring for you all. But I wanted to kind of get you started, and if there's some interest, I'm actually considering doing some retro stuff on the channel. It's not going to be like I'm shifting to retro, so don't anyone panic, but with that said, if I do get some requests, I might make some old retro PCs. Nothing like, you know, like a super shift towards it. It'll be still mostly modern technology, but I think it could be kind of cool to look at like old Voodoo systems. Like, you know, I'd love to look at the original Voodoo 1. That would be really awesome. Or perhaps do like an old Pentium 2 with a Voodoo something build, or look at, I don't know, like an old Spectrum or something like that. I mean, that could be kind of cool. And yeah, that would be something I could do every so often. Certainly not, you know, the focus of the channel. But, you know, that's if you guys would be interested. If you do have any old retro hardware like that, Voodoo's 3D effects voodoos or whatever, do let me know, and we could probably work something out. You can email me about that, paul@redgamingtech.com. But anyway, I want to know your stories, and that's kind of the start of this. And perhaps in the next video, if I do start one, we can maybe see if there's a common theme, like what generation did you all start from, and how, you know, what kind of got your interest. And I think that would be kind of a good discussion point. So yeah, that's, I don't know, maybe there's not much interest in this, but I just wanted to talk about it. So E3's on at the moment. I've got lots of reviews that I'm doing, so I just wanted something fun to do, just to kind of get to know you all. And I figure it'd be good because you are all invested in watching me at some point. Like you're spending your time like watching my content and Amy's content, and that means a lot to me. That really does. And it's really weird. I've actually met viewers before, including a couple who I'd not actually intended to meet. It was just kind of like, oh, yeah. They just kind of like, hey, you're Paul, right, from RedGamingTech? Yes. Oh, hey, I watch your content. And that was kind of surreal for me. Not in a bad way. Like, why I started the passion that I did, and I don't know. I just thought it would be kind of cool. With all of that said, hopefully you found this video fun, interesting, something. I don't know, something. But take care of yourselves. Bye for now.